Now, one thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about is a lot of independent candidates and third parties, they always get a bad rap because they always are accused of being spoilers to the Democratic Party, and effectively they get blamed for Republicans getting in office. I mean, case in point, Ralph Nader in 2000. So what do you say to the critics who say these types of things?
Great. That's a really important point. And there are a couple things to say. First, this complaint is usually coming from the Democrats. And it's a very self-serving complaint because what it does is basically tell everybody else to be quiet, to go home and shut up. So there's no better way to protect the status quo from a political opposition. And this is an effort to silence political opposition. So it's really important to see this as the propaganda that it is. But let me say beyond that, if you look at what actually happened in Florida, what happened in Florida was that the Supreme Court stopped the vote count.
Right.
And Gore was just rolled over. But several independent investigative efforts showed that had that vote count been allowed to proceed, it wasn't true. It wasn't true that Gore would have won Florida. So Nader, in fact, or nobody else, in fact, created that loss. That loss was created by the Supreme Court and the Democrats' surrender to that. But let me say beyond that the votes that Nader got were a tiny fraction of the votes that crossed over from Democrats, not to Greens, but from Democrats to Republicans. And that, in turn, was a tiny fraction of the Democrats who just didn't come out. The registered Democrats who refused to come out and vote at all because they were not inspired to do so by Al Gore's campaign. So that's where the Democratic Party bled out. They weren't in the small vote counts that Ralph Nader got. If you were going to tell Ralph Nader to go home and be quiet, then you had to tell that to all the other small parties, by the way, whose votes also could have made that difference of 500-some votes that were short when the Supreme Court stopped the count. You would have had to stop all the socialist parties. You could have stopped the Libertarian Party. You could blame this on any independent voice. Why blame it on the Greens? Because the Greens are the threat to the Democrats, because we have a compelling case to make. And so so the machine works overtime to try to silence the Greens because they're very afraid of us. But let me tell you what they could do. If they were really concerned about the so-called spoiler problem, they could fix that in the blink of an eye, because there's a voting reform called ranked choice voting, which lets you rank your choices. So you could vote number one as Nader or Cynthia McKinney or myself. We could be your number one, and your number two could have been Al Gore or Barack Obama or whoever. That could have been your number two. And what happens in ranked choice voting is that if your number one is eliminated because they were an underdog and they didn't do well, your vote is automatically reassigned to your number two. So there's never any risk of your vote inadvertently helping someone you don't want to help. That is a system that's used in many cities around the country, in San Francisco, Oakland, and the Twin Cities, a variety of other places.
I believe Australia as well.
That's right, and many countries around the world. New Zealand, I believe it's used for some national elections in Ireland too. So there are many countries that use this. Maine, the state of Maine, in fact, is running it as a referendum campaign to use statewide. I believe they have it in force in Portland, Maine now, and they're now looking at it at the state level as sort of part of the stepping stone to going national. But there's no reason why states can't implement it right now. They can pass it in their legislatures. They don't need a constitutional amendment. They can go to fairvote.org, which is the organization that's promoting it. And this can be done right now. So there's no reason to silence people. We have a democracy which is in trouble right now, and silencing voices doesn't make democracy stronger. And it's important to point out that this politics of fear that tells you have to vote your fears and not your beliefs, that politics of fear, where did it get us? it's got a track record. It actually brought everything we were afraid of. All the reasons you were told you had to vote for the lesser evil because you didn't want the massive bailouts for Wall Street or the offshoring of our jobs or the meltdown of the climate or the massive expanding wars or the skyrocketing student debt or the massive expanse of the prison industrial complex. What is it we've got? That's exactly what we've gotten by voting for the lesser evil. And in fact, most of that we got under a Democratic White House with 2 Democratic houses of Congress, which makes the point. The politics, the fear has delivered everything we're afraid of. Why is that? It's because silence is not a strategy. If we be quiet, it just leaves the corporate predators to do what they want. And the lesser evil, at the end of the day, it doesn't stop the greater evil. It actually makes the greater evil inevitable. Because what happens after you get a lesser evil in office, whether you consider that Obama or whether you consider it a whole variety of lesser evil Democrats at the state level, what happens is that those offices then flip from being blue to going red because the base doesn't come out to vote for it. The base, in both midterm elections, in 2010 and in 2014, they were massive losses for the Democrats because their base wouldn't come out. Immigrants, Latinos, youth, labor, etc., would not come out to vote for Democratic candidates, so they massively lost across the board. So forget the lesser evil. It's time to fight for the greater good. That is the only way forward. Democracy needs a moral compass. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have to be that moral compass. The clock is ticking. This is a Hail Mary moment.